Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the AAAS STPF live chat, taking your technical expertise to AI policy. I'm glad you're joining us for today's chat. My name is Christine Rovner. I'm a Senior Program Manager with the Fellowship. I work with both the host offices and the fellows to help all parties have a great engagement in our program. I also will be moderator for today's chat. So this live chat is designed for you to gain insight about and best prepare your application for the AAAS STPF AI Rapid Response Cohort. This is also an opportunity for you to learn about the application and interview process directly from fellows. So speaking of applications, STPF is accepting applications for this cohort through May 1st. Someone who applies by this month's deadline will be considered for a position in fellowship class that begins this fall, September 2024. As a brief overview, fellows in this cohort will be part of the STPF Legislative Branch Fellowships and placed in a personal or committee office in Congress. The fellowships are a paid one-year full-time commitment located in Washington, D.C. Candidates may come from a range of career stages, degrees, and experience. You must have either a PhD or a master's degree plus 3 years of post-degree work experience, or a bachelor's of science degree plus 5 years of post-degree work experience. To be considered for this opportunity, individuals must be U.S. citizens. If you have any questions about eligibility, please make sure to review the eligibility section on our info page or reach out to our team at fellowships@AAAS.org. Okay, on to the purpose of today's chat, getting answers to your questions. Use the question box in your menu bar, and if you like, you can indicate the person or people to whom your question is directed. We'll get to as many questions as we can today. So now I'm happy to introduce you to our fellows who will be joining us for the chat today. Kiri Wagstaff spent 19 years at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California as a principal researcher in the Machine Learning and Instrument Autonomy group. At JPL, she focused on investigating ways that machine learning can be used to enable scientific discoveries and increase the autonomy of space missions. Kiri has taught at Oregon State University and is now serving as a AAAS Congressional Fellow. She's passionate about keeping machine learning efforts relevant to our society's needs. Owen Stafford works on policies related to the human rights impacts of AI. He was previously a researcher at the Center for the Governance of AI in the UK and was a postdoctoral fellow at the Middle East Initiative at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. He earned a PhD in political science from UCLA, his master's in science and political theory from the London School of Economics and Political Science, and his bachelor's in social studies from Harvard. And finally, Serena Booth received her PhD at MIT's CSAIL program in 2023. Serena studies how people write specifications for AI systems and how people assess whether AI systems are successful in learning from specifications. While at MIT, Serena served as an inaugural social and ethical responsible computing scholar, teaching AI ethics and developing MIT's AI ethics curriculum that is also released on MIT OpenCourseWare. After graduating with a bachelor's degree in computer science from Harvard, Serena worked as an associate product manager at Google to help scale Google's ArcCore augmented reality product to 100 million devices. So welcome, everyone. So before we get to some of the audience questions, I'll kick it off with one. What initially drew you to the policy fellowships? When and how did you decide to apply? I'd love to kick things off with Kiri, if that's okay.
Such a great question. So I don't know if everyone on the call is aware, but last year, this process happened very, very rapidly. So I first heard about it at the end of July, and the application process was due, I think, at the beginning of August. And then we had interview process, and then starting September 1st. And it really jumped out to me because I have a career-long commitment and interest in doing AI and machine learning that does impact people's lives. I created a class at OSU focused on the challenges of using machine learning in the real world. And when I saw this opportunity, I thought, oh, this is like a one level up from everything I've been working on, where it really does intersect with people's lives. How can we get AI knowledge out there and make informed legislation? So it was a great fit from the start.
Thanks for that. And Owen, how about you?
Yeah, similarly, in my background before had been, in academia and in research-oriented think tank, and I'd always been very interested in how can I use my research to understand the sort of societal impacts of technology, from internet censorship to how AI affects human rights and international conflict. And so, my motivation was always like, okay, how can I make an actual difference in the world with my research? And so this opportunity came along, and I thought, well, here's an opportunity to have the most direct impact that I've ever had, and particularly at a very exciting time for AI policy, when obviously there is much more public attention to it, and attention by decision makers in government. And there's also a widespread recognition of the importance of AI and its potential impact on the world. But at the same time, decision makers are really trying to get up to speed quickly on figuring out, okay, how does this stuff work? What exactly is the impact? What should and can we do to make sure that that impact is net positive? So this particularly seemed a great time to try to get directly involved in shaping policy. And then finally, I would just say, on a personal level, I'm interested in exploring different careers, and this seemed like a really great way to test, outside of academia or think tanks, what other kinds of careers might be fulfilling for me.
Excellent point. And Serena, how about you?
Yeah, so during my time at MIT, I've gotten very involved in science policy. So I was the president of our science policy initiative for a few years, and I've been organizing different educational events or advocacy events for students to participate in. So I knew I wanted to come and do something in DC around AI policy. And so I'd scheduled my PhD defense on October 7th to allow me to apply to the AAAS Standard Fellowship that has a November 1st deadline. But as Kiri said, this application came along with 2 weeks notice. And so I figured, oh, what the heck, might as well just, like rally and get it out of the way. So I ended up applying a year earlier than I thought. But it was the larger AAAS fellowship had been a long-term goal for me.
Definitely a quick turn process for us all here on the call from last year. And this year, fortunately, we have built in a little bit more time for the process. So I have a couple questions coming in already. Could you talk more about how you study the policies? Like, how are you actually part of that policy making and understanding? And what are the policymakers that you interact with as a fellow? Anyone?
Sure, I can jump into that. So one of the surprises to me, the 3 of us are all working in the Senate, and I work for in the personal office, meaning I work for one particular senator, Senator Wyden. And one of the things that amazed me was Senate staffs are really big. There's dozens of people working on these. So there's a lot of collaboration, and ideas are sort of flowing both like top down and bottom up all the time. And we're also like interacting with other offices all the time and executive agencies. So sometimes, someone, the senator themselves or someone high up in leadership might have a really clear directive of like, okay, we want to do this specific policy. And so we figure out as the staff how to implement that. Other times, it might be a little more general. They might say, this is an issue I want to prioritize, and these are sort of, the objectives I want to accomplish in this area. And then the staff might have sort of more initiative to kind of come up with more specific ideas. So there's kind of an interesting back and forth. And then also, yeah, collaboration with other offices and with agencies. It's an interesting balancing act of both, cooperating and compromising, and occasionally somewhat butting heads, especially between Congress and executive agencies, and with the same agency, you're both sometimes at odds and sometimes very much on the same page. And so I guess, yeah, I'll leave it there for now and turn it over to Kiri and Serena.
I can jump in with the, I can jump in with the committee perspective. So while Owen and Kiri work in personal offices, I work for the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. And so I still work for sort of an individual member. I work for Sherrod Brown, but the committee tends to try to focus on slightly longer term issues. So thinking about, you know, this more targeted, like, how is AI going to affect the banking, housing, and urban affairs sort of sectors of the economy? And so we're able to sort of do a little bit like longer term planning, a little bit less reactive to the daily news and the daily crises that you see emerging in AI policy space. Kiri.
Oh, right. So I'm in the Office of Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona, and a lot of what Owen already said applies for my work too. I think I would highlight that as a fellow, especially in AI, sometimes I'm reviewing a bill that someone has approached us and asked us to join and giving a technical analysis of what's in that bill to help my office make an informed decision. Sometimes it is coming up with our own legislation. And I would say that process has been fascinating to learn, because it's not just about coming up with a great idea. That's kind of the starting point. So Owen alluded to getting input from agencies that may be involved in what's in the bill. That's a key part. There's also connecting with stakeholders outside of Congress, the American people, organizations, individuals, universities, whatever, that may be involved with that topic. And something that I'm actually really excited about is that there's a big push for getting a bipartisan team behind a bill. So we hear a lot in the media about fighting and partisan differences, but I see a lot of effort to bring people together and modulate the language or the goals, however it needs to be, so it has broader appeal, because that's how we truly move things forward. You can't do it by yourself. And that's been a big piece of what we do here.
Great perspective, a little bit on some of the maybe the day-to-day and sort of differences between member offices and committee work, which is important to know. We have a couple questions coming in about your AI experience and sort of what makes you a good candidate. So one person asked, what kind of experience did you have prior to this working at the intersection of AI and tech or regulation? Tech regulations or policy? And then someone, you know, also added in, like, what made you a great candidate, sort of from your experience, what's making you a good candidate for this fellowship?
That's kind of a tricky question, because we don't exactly get feedback on our applications about, oh, it's really great that you had these 3 things. So it's kind of more of an overall picture, I would guess. Unlike Serena, I was not coming in with any previous policy experience at all, honestly. I think what made me a good candidate was having several decades of experience in the AI field. So I've seen it evolve from something that I would say was a little more niche or on the sidelines of computer science and for society, to something that is in our daily lives everywhere. And I think having that perspective and having worked to integrate it into real projects that are deployed in the world myself was really helpful. I will say too, I don't know if we want to get into the more specifics or topics, but being able to work in Senator Kelly's office has been an amazing fit for me, because I get to do maybe half my time on AI work, but there's been the freedom and the need to help out with legislation related to NASA, commercial space, and aviation, because those match my backgrounds too. So I felt like I was bringing like other areas to this fellowship that also were of value.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think it's one of the interesting things about our group of there's 6 of us in the inaugural class of AI fellows is I think we all bring like really different backgrounds. So my degree is in political science. I studied in grad school a little bit about machine learning, but mostly from the perspective of just how can I apply this in my research. And it was only about 5 years ago that I started doing research on AI as a topic. And so of course I had to, get up to speed as much as I could on the technical aspects of AI. And because it's moving very quickly, that's a never-ending process of trying to learn how the frontier is being advanced. But I was coming at it from the perspective of, looking at the societal impacts and figuring out, okay, how are people using this in government or other social arenas, and I think that it's been useful because the work, as I said, the work we do in Congress is very collaborative. Almost, I would say, every project I've worked on has required, the collaboration of multiple people in the office and often outside the office, and bringing together very different perspectives, very different backgrounds. So I think, what's useful for this fellowship is having, obviously very relevant expertise, but also an enthusiasm and an ability to learn about new areas that you have very little background in, figuring out, okay, what do others bring to the table and how can we best work together?
Yeah, and I'll add that I think my breadth of experience was super helpful, both perhaps as being chosen as a fellow, but also in my day-to-day work here. So having some industry experience, having worked at Google and seen, how a large company thinks about building new products and launching them to, hundreds of millions of people, I draw on that experience every day, and also from my experiences at MIT, both as a teacher and a responsible computing educator, and also in my own, basic science research, trying to understand these systems and figure out how we can build, more governable AI systems from the ground up. So yeah, the breadth part was something that I emphasized in my application, and also something that helps me every day here.
Thanks for those perspectives, and I really appreciated, Kiri, that you highlighted that, in fellow placements, while the thrust of this cohort is to bring artificial intelligence knowledge and understanding into the policy process on the Hill, there are opportunities to exercise other skills or other interests in your background, and finding an office or a committee that would be a really good match for that is definitely something that's available to our fellows. So someone wants to ask a little bit more about the application, but really I think a better thrust here is talking a little bit more about those placements and how the placement process actually goes. If you wouldn't mind maybe reflecting a little bit. I know it was a bit of a whirlwind process for all of you, as it is for all of our legislative fellows. And talk a little bit about how you were weighing the opportunities, need or your experience, was sort of, which, was it the office that was sort of driving it? Was it your interests that are sort of driving it? Tell us a little bit about how you were going through that decision making.
I'd love to jump in and say that the thing that struck me right off the bat as we went through that process was the enormous demand for AI expertise. There were only 6 of us. There was no way we could cover all of the offices that wanted to have a fellow work for them. And so just knowing that there was that broad interest was really exciting. And some of the offices had a specific area that they wanted to push forward AI for this purpose, and you could see if that aligned with your interests. Others were just saying, this is a new and exciting and important topic, and we don't have that expertise in our office yet. So we will benefit from having someone here. So we were able to look through these sort of postings of interest from individual offices and committees, and then reach out to the ones that seemed like a good fit, and then set up interviews with them if they were also interested in our background and what we would be bringing. And so it was kind of this joint process that we then, after the interviews, would receive offers from the offices who wanted us to come to them, and just negotiation process before you finally settle on the best fit. I interviewed, I think it was with 9 different offices to try to find the best fit and reach that decision, and I'm super happy with where I ended up with, but I feel like there would have been a lot of good choices there.
It was a very unusual situation to find myself in the sense that there were a lot more offices that wanted fellows than there were fellows. So that was kind of an unusual dynamic as opposed to, say, when you're applying to grad school, and there's a lot more people applying to, the top schools than there are positions. And so that was interesting. Yeah, I would say there were a lot of different considerations I was looking at, and I had to do some, make some sort of trade-offs in terms of like, some offices might be really focused on AI, and then other offices were like, yeah, we want you to work on AI, but we want you to work on a huge range of other things as well. As Kiri said, some offices had already been kind of starting to engage with these issues, and some were just starting from square one. And each of those offers different opportunities and constraints. I also had to think about, okay, to what extent, how much do I agree on the issues with the member that I'm working with? How much is this a situation where I might disagree with them on a number of things, but there are other things where we're more aligned. And again, there can be advantages and disadvantages of working with an office that is closer, more ideologically or less ideologically aligned with where you are. And then of course, I'd say one thing that you just can't compromise on is you really have to like the people you're working with, because this is not, a solo endeavor. You're going to be interacting with a lot of people in your office every day. So like the office culture, the office environment, and just the personalities of the particular people that you'll be working with the most are, that's the one thing I think you can't compromise on.
Yeah, and for me, I felt like, some fellows like really understood the placement process, and they had a plan, and they were, like aggressively pursuing their plan. That wasn't me. I had no idea what I was doing. So I was just sort of taking each interview as it came, and sort of getting a feeling for whether it would be a good fit or not. I didn't expect that I would work for a committee when I went in. I thought I would work for a personal office, but the banking committee won me over. I think they reached out to me. And one of the reasons that they won me over was because they asked questions about my technical expertise during the interview. And so I felt, immediately like I would be valued and able to contribute. And that has panned out. So yeah, I'm having a good time, but I wasn't necessarily the most strategic in the placement process.
One other thing I'd like to add is that even though this idea of, we were the first AI specific cohort, AAAS as a whole, has been doing this for over 50 years. There's, I think, a few thousand alumni. And some offices have never had fellows before, but a lot of the offices I interviewed with had several fellows. And, we had access to their contact information, and we met a lot of those alumni like during the orientation process. So it was really helpful for me to be able to talk to past fellows who'd worked in those offices and get a better idea of, okay, what will this experience be like? Is it very hands-on mentoring, or will you be kind of thrown into the deep end and left to fend for yourself? I think most of the offices, people had very positive experiences. So yeah, that was really useful too.
I just had a couple of things I wanted to add as well. The first is that people told me before and during that process that one other factor you should consider if you're looking at member offices is what committees that person is on. And I heard that advice and I didn't understand its importance. I now have a much better understanding, and yes, it is important. And that's a whole separate thing we could talk about. And secondly, I really wanted to emphasize the support that AAAS gives you for all of this, since they are so experienced at it. But they just set you up with a lot of good training, and they then give you complete freedom, and I think that's really important, to pick your office. So nobody told me, oh, Kiri, you should really go and consider this one or work here. It was a completely open decision, and that meant I had the freedom to pick whatever worked best for me. And finally, the 6 of us in that initial cohort totally leaned on each other during that process too. We had daily check-ins where we were talking about the things we learned, who we talked to, what we were worried about. And I think we've become very close as a group regardless, but in that initial part where we were still getting to know each other, it was so great to have other people going through it too.
Yeah, and we've continued to lean on each other, and like again, it's great that we have like such different backgrounds and areas of expertise, because oftentimes, I'll reach out to Carrie or Serena or one of the other fellows because somebody in my office has a question about this particular area, and I don't know a lot about that. So it's really useful to be able to have that network and the broader, network of AAAS fellows, both current and alumni, to get advice from.
Thanks so much for those reflections and the shout out for the more than 50 years of time that AAAS has spent managing the Congressional Fellows process on Capitol Hill. In the cohort in which these wonderful people serve, there are 38 fellows actually in the legislative branch this year. So our AI cohort is 6 of those, but we bring in all the other fellows, a few sponsored directly by AAAS, but largely sponsored by other societies that partner with us to recruit from their disciplines and make sure that we have a full array of skill sets and backgrounds available on Capitol Hill for the really wide varied needs of the legislators up there. And I appreciate also Carrie pointing out, sort of the freedom to choose. AAAS does provide a sort of a set of positions that offices have volunteered themselves. We would love to have a fellow, but fellows also can seek out their own positions. And if there's a legislator where you're located that you would love to support, you can definitely reach out to that office during the placement process and explore that opportunity. So we have it then, sort of leading right out from placement into your actual placement. Someone wants to know, what were the first few weeks like, and what's your day-to-day like? What are your tasks and responsibilities when you walk in the door to your offices?
I would say the first few months was really not overwhelming, because I had a lot of support both from AAAS and in the office, but just like a fire hose of information and learning to do. So it was exciting, but it's like, okay, wow, there's a lot more I need to get up to speed on quickly about just how Congress works day to day, both like the official procedures, but also just kind of the unofficial norms of how like offices interact with each other and things like that, and how that particular office likes to do things. So there was a lot to learn, and so I felt like now I feel much more confident, and like I am getting a lot more done in any given week than those first few months. Was like, okay, they gave me projects to work on, but I was making very slow progress as I kind of had to ask for a lot of help at each step. Yeah, I guess I don't want to filibuster, even though I'm in the Senate.
Yeah, so before I answered that question, I'd like to add that even if you don't join as an AI fellow, if you join Congress in one form or another as a fellow, you have the opportunity to work on AI policy. So don't feel like this is the only opportunity to do so. The regular AAAS fellows also contribute to AI policy discussions too. As far as this question about day-to-day, it looks a little bit different on committee. Like Owen said, definitely a fire hose. Very strange feeling going from being, at the end of my PhD, where I was super competent and I knew exactly what I was doing, to kind of being the idiot in the room in all discussions. But we spend quite a lot of time working on hearings. So that's a piece of the job that is more committee-centric than personal offices. So we plan, who we want to bring before the committee, either for information finding or for oversight. And we spend a lot of time, thinking about the questions that we want to ask them, and like directing the work of the committee through those types of interactions. So slightly different from personal office day to day, I would say.
I realized I forgot to answer the second part of the question. What am I actually doing day to day now? So Carrie, I'll try to keep it short and hand it back to you, but a really wide range of things. So it's everything from, working on drafts of new bills to, I inherited one bill that a previous fellow had worked on, and now I'm sort of shepherding it through the last stage of like trying to get co-sponsors and endorsements, and then get it introduced in the Senate for a vote. There's things like oversight, where we're like investigating, okay, what is this particular agency doing? Sometimes what is this company doing? And sometimes that's just sort of fact finding and making sure that everything looks the way it should. But sometimes it's, sort of publicly calling them out. I wrote like an oversight letter to an executive agency and said, okay, and we, of course, is written in the voice of the senator, but we have these concerns about this particular policy. So that's been a very interesting part of the process. And then meeting with lots of people, constituents, advocacy groups, academic experts, people from other offices, executive agencies. And then at the same time, just trying to make sure you're constantly kind of scanning the horizon, keeping track of the latest news in your area, carving out some time for just, background research on an issue that you might not be working on now, but may be relevant, may suddenly become urgent in a few months. You never know. And then you're also, not just sort of leading and initiating your own projects, but as I said, it's very collaborative. You're constantly having to give feedback to your coworkers on, bill they might be working on. So you might suggest edits. Even though I'm in a personal office, usually, because my senator is the chair of the committee, we work the personal staff work very closely with that committee staff. And so sometimes I'll be, might be suggesting if they're working on a hearing, like, here's a question you might ask, or here's an expert you might talk to. So it's a really, it never gets boring. There's like constantly different types of work you can do. Okay, filibuster over.
That was great. I'm glad you covered that, because I was going to try to start enumerating the things I do every day. You already covered a whole bunch of them. I also agree with the fire hose start to things. And I like to joke that I'm in Congress school, because it feels like I am back in school on a daily basis. But what makes that work is I've had amazing support in my office. So I meet once a week with the legislative director, and we go through what I'm working on. But then I also work very closely with two of the legislative assistants, one for AI and one for the more space and aviation topics. And initially I was kind of just following them through meetings, through the process, through whatever. And now we've gotten to this sort of naturally change this point where I take meetings myself, or come up with content on my own, and they just kind of look it over as needed. And it's felt very empowering and educational at the same time. So I've now gotten to the point where I've got to draft my own bill, and I'm working through that process and learning what that process is. The writing being only the very first tiny part of getting something to happen, of course. I was thinking of other things to add to Owen's list of things you do every day. Sometimes you're listening to hearings or attending hearings and trying to digest that for the office in terms of, like Serena said, they have set up a hearing. What do we need to know of what transpired there? I've also gotten to write talking points for the senator when he has meetings or public appearances, which is interesting, trying to put yourself into someone else's voice and capture those priorities so that he can be well prepared before he gets into that new environment. What background does he need to know? It goes into that as well. And I've gotten to serve as the staff person accompanying him to an event where he's speaking, and just being there as a resource in case he needs any assistance or last minute questions or anything at all, which is not a job I've ever done before. So it's very exciting. I've had meetings with people I think I never would have had the chance to meet ever in my life, heads of programs and agencies, in the executive branch, and other legislators and their teams. And it continues to surprise me almost on a daily basis of who I get to interact with and what we talk about.
Here's another question about the work that you do. How much time do you spend on research versus meetings? And I'd love, in your answers, I hope you'll define for this audience, which is probably a lot of them from academia, what research actually means at a congressional office. Anyone want to take a stab at this?
I can talk a bit about it. So the meaning of research has definitely changed for me here. So I don't read technical papers much anymore, which is definitely like a big shift. Occasionally I do when it's something that seems like it's going to be important, and that I think we need like that level of depth and expertise on the issue. But most of the time, instead, the research that we're reading is sort of filtered through the media and through advocacy organizations. So I read a lot of Brookings reports, I read a lot of the New York Times, I read a lot of Atlantic articles. Karen Howe, shout out, great AI reporter. Those types of, that type of research, that's very common for me. I'd say I spend about 50% of my time doing that type of work. But the actual, technical depth piece of it is not something that I spend a lot of time on at all anymore. And I've also been enjoying rejecting requests for reviews for papers in my academic world while I'm here.
Yeah, I think the research you're talking about, Serena, I've had the same observation, is that we're trying to understand what people think about what is out there. That's just as important as the factual experiment and the results that may have been reported in the research, but how does it fit into that bigger conversation? What fears do people have? What needs do they have is extremely important. And that you're not going to get that from a technical paper as much.
Yeah, and to what extent is some particular scientific or technological area already having an impact versus something that might interest me but is still sort of very theoretical, and knowing sort of like, is this something we need to prioritize now, or is this something that maybe in 5 or 10 years could have a big impact, but there's it's not something that is having huge impact yet, or that it would be a good idea to try to like very specifically regulate now, for instance.
Another piece, oh, sorry, were you done, Owen?
Yeah.
Okay, that might be relevant for those in the academic or even other research environments right now, is that you will need to separate yourself from any research you're doing that has a federal source of funding, because if you're working in Congress, you can't think about funding something that would then potentially come back to you. That would be a conflict of interest. And so necessarily your research activities will shift. I mean, it doesn't mean you can't read technical papers, and you probably still will, but you can't be out there, making use of those research funds for the period that you're here. But that doesn't mean you can't still be involved and participate in conversations, and it's just at a different level. So.
Thanks for that reminder as well. Sorry, Owen, go ahead.
It's been an interesting thing for me to see how much Congress relies on expertise from outside Congress, both from academic experts, but also, think tanks and nonprofits that produce, really interesting reports, but also, that oftentimes are willing to meet with you and kind of, give you their impressions of the technical aspects of some issue, and also sort of, what is the current sort of real world impact of this, and what are the issues and opportunities that are important to prioritize right now.
Yeah, building on that, a big part of your job is knowing who you should reach out to ask to speak about a specific issue. And so that's somewhere where I find myself using my research expertise, because, over the 5 years of the PhD, I've built a network and I understand who knows what about which issues. And so we're able to go and very directly go and speak to, the world's expert on a particular topic. Kiri.
Oh, I was just going to say that since a lot of our work, at least especially right now, is talking to constituents and other people who come to the office to kind of pitch their policy priorities, and those often involve funding, especially this time of year. I don't know if Owen and Serena have experienced this, but a lot of them seem to come to these meetings not really expecting that they'll get to talk to someone who knows anything really about AI. And then they have this sudden moment of like, oh, you actually understand what I'm talking about. And some of them get really excited and others get very nervous. And they kind of back off and say, I'm not the expert, I'll have to refer you to my colleague. Because I think in general, often the folks you would send for those meetings would be generalists who are experienced in interacting with Congress. They don't tend to bring their AI expert, although sometimes I kind of wish they did. So those conversations can be really interesting, and the dynamic, just that their expectations and then what you can bring to that conversation are often not the same.
That actually goes really nicely into a question that we got about managing the interactions on the Hill if the other party that you're speaking with doesn't either value your background or your expertise, or are skeptical of sort of where you're coming from and your utility in the conversation. I don't know if you had any of those engagements, and you can comment on sort of managing that.
Honestly, I can't say I've run into that. Everyone here has been so engaged, respectful, polite, and genuinely interested Often when I think we're just going to talk about some technical subject, they usually want to know, where were you before you came here? That's a very common question. And they're very curious about that. And I think that leads into like a recognition of your experience that's relevant for that topic. I also want to say it's a little relevant here, but one of the big lessons for me so far has been that Congress on the inside is really different from Congress on the outside. So the vision you get in the media is the kind of extreme, kind of the crazy, wild, clickbait kind of coverage of what's happening here. But the work that's happening here is not like that at all. Between offices, between parties, I see a lot of people working really hard to come together and try to find things that they do agree on. And they're all really smart, really accomplished and hardworking folks. So it's been a real positive to be able to be part of that. Again, you don't always get that message, unfortunately, from the outside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would definitely echo that. And it's been interesting to see too that how, the same staff of, another, say, senator or member of the House who, might be from a different party, you might simultaneously be like co-sponsoring a bill together and having this complete dust up over some other bill on a completely unrelated issue. And I've had that experience with, advocacy organizations as well, literally endorsing one bill that my senator is introducing, while at the same time, trying to get other members of Congress to vote against another bill he's introducing. And I think that's a very common experience. And so it's been really eye-opening to me to realize, like, okay, you can kind of compartmentalize and agree to disagree about some issues, while with those same people finding that there can be more common ground and ability to work together on other issues where it turns out you actually have some similar goals, including, members of Congress or groups that I would have thought, well, there's nothing I could possibly work with them on.
Yeah, I'll say that it's changing a bit as the election looms closer. So my boss is up for re-election. It's a pretty tight race, and so I think we see, perhaps like less collaboration and less of those like interactions as that date gets nearer. But once he's re-elected, it'll all be great again.
Can you tell us a little bit about work-life balance? What, sort of managing expectations in your office, but what's your work day like, or the work, I guess, the pacing of that, and what kind of work-life balance do you have?
I will say that the job here is really intense because it's intellectually active almost the entire time, and then also socially. You're talking to people, you're working on things, you're brainstorming, you're researching, whatever. And so it tends to be very intense for the entire workday. And every office is a little different, but something that struck me immediately in my office is that they have the best work-life balance I've ever experienced in my life. When they go home we usually work from 9 until 6 when the Senate is in session. At 6 o'clock, people go home. They do not email you. They do not text you. They do not call you. And weekends are the same. There's this definite expectation that when we're here, we're focused, we're working. And when you go home, you have another part of your life that needs attention. And that's really different from academia or my work at JPL or anywhere else that I've been.
I would definitely echo that. But also note that, like, there is a lot of variation, I think, between offices. So I've had a very similar experience to Kiri in that my office, I feel like, has a really good work-life balance and very reasonable expectations. There are definitely other offices where they expect you to work much longer hours. They expect you to be on call, on the weekends or in the evenings. So I would say it's really important during the placement process to get a good sense of what those expectations are. And if at all possible, try to talk to people, fellows who worked in those offices before. I would say there's also a lot of variation in the intensity over time that, sometimes, things are a little slower and you might have time to work on more kind of long-term projects. Bills can take a year or more from when somebody has the idea of let's do this bill to when it, gets a vote. That can be a really long process. But other times something will come up that day and somebody in your office needs information or needs feedback or needs you to write something up that day. and that might be maybe more true of the personal offices than the committee offices. I'm not sure, but at least that's been my experience. So yeah, just I guess be prepared for that.
Yeah, I can't say my office has quite the same level of work-life balance, it sounds like. So we're very 9 to 6, and we do have like work from home telework days. And so it feels quite flexible in many ways. But I think I work less hard than most of my coworkers. So at 6 p.m., people still seem to generally be here. And then emails do continue to come in through the evening and over the weekend. And I think it's sort of a nature of this like political moment in part as well. But yeah, no, people are definitely working very intensely. You also feel a lot of guilt anytime you're not working, because like you could be doing something useful, you know, for the American people, right? And so anytime you decide you're going to go home, you feel a sense of like, oh, well, okay, I'll go walk my dog, but like I could be doing something more impactful than that right now. So you have to manage your own expectations as well, and make sure you build in, you know, empathy and time for yourself to recuperate.
Can you tell us a little bit about the opportunities outside of your office? So you have these conversations happening within your office, but maybe talk a little bit about engaging those other stakeholders outside your office, or other ways that you remain engaged with other parties, such as scientific societies and others that are sort of in your orbit already.
I think there's a lot of variety there. I'll just mention one that, so I first heard about this opportunity through the AAAI mailing list last summer. And as I've grown to know more about this experience and this opportunity, I naturally was like, why doesn't AAAI have more presence here? And so I've been able to talk with some of them and with Christine about ways to have the society, the organization itself, be more connected. At the AAAI conference this year, we were able to organize a plenary session on AI policy that had input from me from the US Congress perspective, but also folks from the NSF to get the executive branch, and then some international input as well, because AAAI is not just a US organization. And I think an awareness that even for researchers, there is an important connection to the real world, and that this will ultimately not only influence what kind of funding is there to support research, what those priorities are, but then what happens, how does that research get back into the real world? How will it have that impact in the end?
Yeah, it's been, there are certainly lots of opportunities to reach out to people outside Congress. As I mentioned, that think tanks, advocacy groups, academic experts, people in industry. I think being able to say I work for Senator so and so can certainly open doors. And so sometimes those are very directed. It's like, we're working on this bill. I would like to get your technical expertise on this very specific question. But there's also opportunities. There's always, fascinating talks and workshops and conferences going on in DC. There's great opportunities to just go in a more open-ended way and just, okay, learn about what is this researcher working on? What is this, human rights activist working on? And sometimes that's led me to end up working on issues that I think wouldn't have occurred to me otherwise if I hadn't sort of opened myself up to those opportunities. And then, you meet really interesting people doing that, that I'm sure, I will continue to collaborate with even after this fellowship is over.
Yeah, and through the fellowship, you hear a lot that, anybody will reply to an @senate.gov email address. And I've really found that to be true. Even when you're like, can you meet today? They'll say, yes, of course I can meet today. When if you emailed them independently, perhaps you would have a 4-month turnaround time. So there's a lot of power and a lot of responsibility in that as well.
The big question is out there from a lot of people. What are your plans for after this fellowship? What are you going to do with this experience once you leave the Hill?
I'm still trying to decide. I have some interest in working like an executive branch agency. I'm interested. The impression I get is that work tends to be a little more specialized, where in a congressional staff, you have to be a little more of a generalist. So that interests me, but also, given the really positive experience I've had with people working at nonprofits and research centers in DC, that kind of work interests me too. So I'm continuing to explore those, quite different paths. And this fellowship has been a great way to get exposure to people who are working in those different areas that I'm interested in, and get more of a sense of like, okay, what does it take to make a career in those areas, and what are the steps one takes to break into those professions.
I'm planning to return to academia and be Professor Booth, but not without a bit of a change in direction because of this fellowship. So originally I had been planning to go and pursue my basic science technical research on reinforcement learning and AI systems, but now I'm looking at it more as like an 80%, 20% kind of split, where 80% of my time I'm going to be pursuing my technical agenda, but 20% of my time I'm going to be working on AI governance in different ways. And so I imagine half of that will be continuing the type of work that I do in Congress, sort of science communication, trying to explain the ideas, the technical ideas to this audience. And then the other half will be more, like technical research for the governance of AI systems.
Yeah, my plan is to also return to academia, and teaching is a huge passion for me. So I'm super excited to take some of the pieces here and that I've been learning and participating in, and inject them into the class I've been teaching, again, about the real world challenges associated with this technology. I've had the chance over this year to do several guest lectures in various classes already, and so I've been kind of refining some of those, I think, useful messages for students. That's just eye-opening to see how what you're doing has that connection. And also looking at, for me in Oregon, but there's a lot of, it's opened my eyes too, there's a lot of opportunities locally and at the state level in terms of providing technical advice to lawmakers. So I think there's other ways that I can still stay engaged and kind of scratch that itch as well.
Thanks for that. So as we're coming up on the hour, we're going to need to wrap this up, but I have one more question for our panelists. What's one thing everybody should do before hitting submit on their application?
I'll start with some advice that I should have taken myself. Plan a vacation before you get to DC. Take some time off, plan to be gentle for yourself, because it's going to be, like we said, you're going to drink from the fire hose. It's going to be very intense once you arrive. So make sure you've planned your schedule so that not only do you get your application in, you get your interviews done and you get the job, but you also give yourself time to recuperate and rest up before you come.
I would just that's absolutely true, what Serena said. And I'll add that I would make sure in your application that you convey both beyond your intellectual curiosity in your topic, why you think your topic is important for the world or for society, how it ultimately impacts people's real lives. And then also, you're making the case for your expertise and what you can contribute, but also make sure you convey in your application what is it that you want to learn and how do you want to grow from this experience, because it really is about combining those two things.
Those are great points. I will actually put in a plug for congress.gov, a site I had not made much use of before this fellowship, but it's actually a super useful place for you to see. You can search on what bills are out there in AI, so that your application can be informed. Not that you have to write a whole, fully referenced summary of the current legislation, but it's more than just you're an AI expert, but you see how this links to things that people care about. There are more than 300 bills with AI in them that have been introduced just this year. And so there's probably something there that connects with one of your interests, and it's nice to have something current you can talk about either in your application or in the interview itself. And then just one kind of generic but very useful concrete tip is, after you write your application, read it out loud to yourself. It's like a really great way to catch those things that your eye just runs right over but aren't quite right or don't make sense. So it's a generally thing I like to do with any kind of writing that I send out.
Great advice from everyone. Thank you all so much for that. So sadly, we've come up on our hour. I do want to just hit on one couple questions that we gotten about the application process itself. I just wanted to remind everyone that the application is due at 11:59 p.m. on May 1st. That will be Eastern time, 11:59 p.m. Eastern time. Just to let you know, we will then process the applications through a couple of review processes in our selection committee. So we'll be conducting interviews in June and making decisions by late June, just to give you a sense of the time frame. So that should give everyone enough time, definitely a lot more time than this group, to turn around and get to DC in time for the September 1st start date of our orientation. As you heard from the candidates, or the fellows, sorry, here today, there are a variety of backgrounds and perspectives that a fellow can bring. So we're not tied to just early career people or people with tons and tons of experience. We've got a wide range, and you can also see a wide range of disciplines as well. So I hope that everyone on this call is feeling included and can potentially see themselves as part of the AI cohort. If we didn't get to your question today, please email us at fellowships@AAAS.org or reply to any of the live chat emails, and we will be able to get back to you that way. Thanks once again to all our panelists, Kiri, Owen, and Serena. Really appreciate your insights. And thanks to all of you for joining us today on the webinar. Have a good day.